Welcome to Reptile Fight Club. It's me, your host, Justin Julander, and with me, as always, is Chuck
Your
Poland.
faithful friend, Chuck Poland.
Did I rip off the NPR guys?
Did you? I don't
know. Sounded like that sounded really familiar, but anyway. How you been, man?
Good, dude. Just, sweating it out here in California right now. We finally got our air conditioning on. It's hot, so 'tis the season though. So how about you?
Yeah, it's been pretty hot here as well, but we just had kind of a break in the weather, had some rain and stuff, so that's been nice. It's overcast today. Maybe it will rain a little more, so yeah, not too bad right now.
Nice.
But we actually were just down in California, so that was kind of nice.
Well, that was a good trip. I'm sorry I couldn't make it up, man. I had made a prior commitment to a buddy, so
no worries. How was the shooting?
It was fun. It was good. Yeah, we just it was, where we shoot at is out in Del Zura, not quite to Del Zura, but it's out off Campo, like out east. So it was hot, very hot. Like we probably quit shooting around 10:30 because it was just too hot to take.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty apparent by the crowds at the beach that everybody was getting away from the heat, man. It was nice 75 degrees at the beach. We went on Thursday and it was like empty. There were like 5 cars in the lot we were in by the beach. And then Saturday we went around 11 o'clock and there was like a 1.5 mile line just to get in. Yeah. And so we had to drive down. That was the beach we'd planned to go to. So we drove down south and we got into one right as they put up the full sign behind us. So we squeaked in there and then,
Where'd you go? You go Huntington Beach?
This was Huntington. Yeah.
Huntington. Yeah. So, I like Huntington Beach. Me and my cousin was up when I used to come up for NARBC. I'd stay with him up in Huntington Beach, and he wasn't far off the beach. We'd always watch the volleyball nationals they have there, and it's happened right around the same time. And
ton of courts there.
Yep. And it's just it's a fun time right around then. That was always a good time for NARBC up there. Is just a lot of stuff going on in Huntington Beach. So I always enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was always fun vending those shows. I miss the old gang that we used to do NARBC show with. That was fun times. Still not sure what happened to some of them. I miss that Jeremy Kriske dude. He was good. He was good peeps, man. I know off the face of the earth, though, huh? Yep, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
but Chris Behoff's still around, and he's good dude. Few others. It's a fun crowd out there.
Yeah, we who else was out there? There was
we had that picture of us at like going out to dinner or something after the show.
There was the big
Steve would come. It's always cool to have Steve out there and Ben and
I bet Behoff would remember all those guys' names.
Yeah,
but, there's that really big dude. I can't remember his name. He was around for a while, and then I think he moved. I think he may have moved to Florida, but he's still. I know he's still around. I don't connect with him much. But good times out there. Good times.
Yeah, we went up to the LA Zoo, checked out the lair, and it was pretty cool zoo. They've got a nice collection. Got some good stuff there, so that was fun to go check out the zoo with the kids. They were a little worn out, Teenagers get a little fussy when they get warm and worn out.
What they do?
It's a strange phenomenon.
Yeah,
it
right.
occurs, yeah.
But
we had a good time. So
that's cool.
We wanted to get in the last trip before school started. So
how's Treg?
Yeah, he's doing good. Cousins, Treg and Jenny are great. Call him the Hotel Julander out there.
Yeah, for sure, man.
They're awesome.
They have hosted many a friend and Julander as well.
Yeah.
So
you guys have all slept on their couch and good times.
Yeah.
But they my brother-in-law's living there too, so we got to hang out with him. He
nice.
got stationed here in LA and with the Air Force, and so Anson's a great guy. We had a lot of fun with him. He went to the beach with us on Saturday and hung out with him. He's great fun. So
nice.
Yeah, it's nice though. They're going to be a little closer. They were in Texas and Alaska before that, so it's hard to see them too often when they were that far off. But now in California, it's only half a day's drive or so.
Yeah.
So you can see them a little more frequently. Hopefully, my sister's still in Texas, kind of waiting for things to settle down with the pandemic and all that kind of garbage, and then move out to LA and join her husband.
Wow, that's awesome. So in a time where all of the Californians are fleeing to Texas, the Jewlanders are fleeing to but back into California. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah,
good.
this should be fun. So now I'll have another excuse to come down to Southern California.
Yeah.
Besides
Perfect.
the herp. So cool, man. Anything going on with your reptiles?
Man, just I've got the Phelsuma grandis babies. I've got 4 of them now, so they're kind of coming along. I probably need to get an ad up for 2 of them here pretty shortly, and then I've got 3 more eggs still in the incubator. So probably in the coming couple of weeks, maybe 2, maybe 3 weeks. I don't know. I didn't do very good on writing down when those things were found. So I'm kind of just guesstimating it, but whatever. Everything here is getting fed and getting ready. Diamonds are looking really nice. Tracy are looking really nice. I've been trying to get the Pro Heat panels from Pro Products, but they've just had, COVID's got them struggling for materials, so they're not able to get the aluminum framing for the sides on their panels. And I've just been waiting, and so I ended up just buying 2 Helix panels, which I've used Helix panels before, and they're you got to off gas them for the material and stuff. Whereas the Pro Products panels, you just plug them in and go. So, but I just finished off gassing those things, and I just can't afford to wait any longer to get my panels in there. I kind of run those animals pretty cool, like 80 degrees right up until, when I start cutting off food, I'll keep running them roughly around 80. But once we get past, March time frame, I usually kick that heat on for them and give them that 85-degree basking spot. And so I just needed to make sure I had that stuff like all set and ready to go. So a little early, but nonetheless, I was just done waiting. And I've had my thermostat just needing panels to plug into it. So that's pretty much ready to go. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully, man, I'm hoping for a good year this coming year. It would be nice to hit that out the box again.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be good to get some more Tracy out there.
Yeah, I'll have to get some out of the house finally too. So that'll be.
That'll be a nice problem to have, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
pretty popular right now.
One more clutch, it'd really do it.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yep. Yeah, things are good. I got that last clutch of Western Simpsons, and they've all shed out. They're looking nice, and got I had to build a couple hatchling racks so I could fit everybody individually. I've got too many holdbacks. I need to move some stuff out of here and get some stuff out of the way. Still got a few pygmies from last year that aren't doing so great as far as feeding, and so I need to keep getting them going. But this year's babies are just rocking. So
is that tough when you have like these babies that are doing so hot for you feeding wise, but then the ones that aren't, trying to like make sure you cater to the ones that aren't doing so good when the ones that are doing so good are just not, are just so easy, right? And
it's a weird phenomenon. I think I heard Casey Lazick talk about it. He said that like the first year he produced pygmies, like all the babies ate just fine, and all this everybody was telling him, oh, they're a nightmare, they're a headache and blah, and then they were just fine. It was easy, and he's like, oh, what's everybody talking about? This is easy stuff. And then he bred them again the next year, and he said the next year they were just, none of them would eat to save their lives. And he said he doesn't know what the difference was or what happened or what changed, but he's like, then I understood what everybody was talking about. So you have your good years and your bad years, and I haven't figured out what causes that, or else it'd be an easy fix.
Dude,
because all these guys are doing great for the most part. I mean, most of them have taken on their first try, and even the Western stems, and all the children's and spotteds and Stimsons, all the Eastern stems as well. So they're doing really good, but I don't know what the secret is, but I'm taking it. I'm happy with it.
Don't look the gift horse in the mouth.
Yeah, I should have the 2021s ready to go soon too.
Nice.
So had some cool things hatch out. So some fun stuff for future projects. So yeah, stay tuned. I'm not sure when I want to release that information of what I hatched out, because it's really kind of a cool thing. So we'll see. Just some weird morph thing going on. So got to figure out what's happening with it. But I'll see
something that you saw across the clutch, or
well, it looks like it maybe.
I'm sorry, maybe I should just shut up.
It looks like maybe a recessive trait, but only 2 out of the 5 animals that hatched from that. It was a smaller clutch. The female is a little smaller, but so she had 5 eggs, and 2 out of the 5 were this had this
aberration.
Aberration. Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't look like it's something with chance. And we selected. I mean, it's selected the father based on his phenotype.
Got you.
And then bred him back to his offspring, 2 females. One of the clutches went bad. The eggs weren't that solid to begin with, and then the second clutch went the distance, and 2 out of the 5. So I'm curious to see if maybe that female got the gene, and I don't know if the other. We'll see if the other one has it as well, or if it's if it's indeed recessive, or if it's well, I don't know. I got to work all that stuff out before I get too excited.
Exciting,
but it's kind of a neat thing. And both of the mutations ate on their first go around, like the first offering. They took a pinky mouse, so. Man, they're looking solid already, so not a bad problem to have them, I guess. So.
Yeah, well, it definitely puts a smile on your face.
Yeah, it's exciting to have something different hatch out. I mean, I'd take a wild type of this species any day, but it's kind of interesting or fun. And maybe
but if you could prove out a morph, would that be better?
I wouldn't say better. I mean, interesting and kind of fun, but that kind of leads us into our topic, right?
Something new. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, hit them off with the topic.
Yeah. So today we're going to discuss monoculture. So there is kind of a trend, or I don't know, when you're at a reptile show and you ask people, oh, do you keep any reptiles? What they always say, like ball python, boa, leopard gecko, corn snake, it's all kind of one representative of the groups. And so, we're going to kind of discuss and debate or fight about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, or, how that might, benefit the hobby to have that monoculture, or how it's ruining the hobby. I don't know. Maybe there's no left or right side. We can discuss that. So
and we will.
How that works.
And we will.
And we will. All right. Yeah. I drove for about 12 hours yesterday. We got on the way home. We got caught in this crazy hailstorm. It was like just this perfect like quarter-mile stretch across the road. The clouds just went across and just dumped hail, and we just happened to be passing by right at that time. So they kind of closed down the freeway and made us sit there.
A hailstorm on the first of August.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was crazy. It was pelting the car. It was loud. I was talking to Rob Stone at the time. He's like, "What is that noise?" So I'm like, "Yeah, we're stopped on the freeway to be hailed on, I guess." And then
all hail ice.
All hail broke loose. And then we drove a little further, and like the whole freeway was covered with water, and we had to drive through this section. And then after that, it was just fine. I mean, it rained a little bit in some spots, but for the most part, it was smooth sailing from there, but it delayed us by an hour. So we got home about maybe 9:30. So
you're short on worn out. Yeah, you're short on good sleep and
not thinking straight. So I'm probably babbling on, but so
maybe I can.
Hopefully I can. Yeah,
maybe I could best you in your disadvantaged state.
There we go. Take advantage. Stick a knife and pour salt on the wound. That kind of thing. So, all right. So let's flip the coin, man. You ready to give it a call? All right, here we go.
Give it a call. Let's see.
What you got?
Tails.
It's heads.
Yeah, man. You suck.
I swear I'm not. I swear I'm not cheating here. Just calling it how it lands.
I was gonna, I full on say, if you weren't such an honest guy, I would have sworn up and down by now that you rigged the toss.
Yeah. Well, so I've thought a little bit about this since we were going, and I probably would trend to say, I don't like monoculture, but I'm going to defend it this time. I'm going to
defend
monoculture. Yeah, I'm going to go on the
All
side of monoculture. So I don't know if that's
good.
a good move or not, but we'll go with it. So, do you want to defer or head out? I think I anticipate your answer. So
yeah, I always defer.
Maybe I'll go ahead and start us out.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, I was thinking about that because, you go to one of these reptile shows and you almost can't know when one table ends and another begins, right? Mm-hmm. It's like all ball pythons, boas, corn snakes, and stuff like that. So it's kind of bothered me to some extent, but at the same time, like I see, it's kind of a commonality. When you talk to people and they say, "Oh, I've kept that species," you're like, "Oh, me too." And who hasn't kept a ball python or a boa or all these different beginner or starter or most accessible reptiles, right? So they're very easily attainable. They do very well in captivity. They're commonly bred in captivity. So the ones that you can get are generally captive bred, and free of parasites and that kind of thing. And so, why not have that be a good starter and have that be a good thing and have people start out with those things? So I would say, that's probably a good thing. And then there's a lot of information out there on those things. So you have several books on ball pythons, boa constrictors, corn snakes, leopard geckos, and a lot of websites and different people who breed and keep them. And so lots of people who can give advice. Usually most beginners are starting with them. So they're going to get, they're going to have a lot of beginner questions. And so those are usually easily answered by quite a big group of people. So I think by that token, maybe monoculture isn't as bad as I thought it was. Maybe it's a good thing for the hobby. So that's kind of what I'd lead with.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a couple of ways to start off, but I think, to me, the most obvious way would be, if we're starting to keep in a monoculture and our areas are filled with a lot of the same reptiles, it's taking away from the captive biodiversity, if you want to say, where we're not necessarily taking the best advantage of our abilities as keepers and leveraging probably what we would like to talk about in creating captive biodiversity of species if we're participating in a monoculture. I think there's a lot of good reasons why monocultures make sense in captivity and in human care, but I think as a philosophical approach, monocultures do not really serve us very well if we're truly trying to work towards a captive biodiversity that is kind of representative of our wild biodiversity. That's probably how I would lead.
Mm-hmm. So I was, I think I talked about this on Bill's podcast, Lizard Brain Radio. I was on there the other day and we were talking about the Mark O'Shea book, The Big Book of Snakes. And I looked in there and there were so many species I'd never even heard of or knew existed in some ways, and I'm kind of recognized as the snake guy and around here. And, people expect me to know a lot about snakes, and I probably know more than the average person on the street, as we all do. But, there were so many that I'd never heard of or never known about, and really kind of cool species. They looked really neat. And I thought, well, why don't more people keep those? And I look and it's like, oh, they're snake specialists or they're lizard specialists, or these ones eat lizard eggs, or these ones only eat blind snakes. It's like, how do you do that? How do you keep that? How do you represent those in captivity? And if people said, oh, these are cool, let's start importing them, that's going to lead to a lot of snakes meeting an untimely end, because they're probably not going to do well. They're probably best kept by a very limited number of keepers. So I would think for the most part, for the general populace, those keeping reptiles, they're probably well served by the big five, or whatever you want to call them. Those commonly available species like ball pythons, boa constrictors, and things like that. And another, I guess, aspect to that is as they're more commonly bred in captivity, they almost become domesticated, and so they're very more, they're easier to feed on the available rodents and laboratory rodents that we have available to feed our animals. They will take to those very easily, and so they're not going to give too many problems for the most part. And so they also lose that tendency to be aggressive, or those kind of things that come with domestication. And so I think there's a lot of nice aspects of these things that are kept in captivity and bred out to several generations that we can benefit from, and especially with new keepers. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, because most keepers in the United States are not specialist keepers. They're not good keepers. They're beginners, and so they need a species that they can begin with. And so I think the majority of the things that are produced in the U.S. are one of those commonly kept species. And now we have some newer ones like crested geckos, or some of that group that are coming up in popularity and are bred. I remember several years ago, maybe there was one breeder of crested geckos at the show, and then all of a sudden now it's all, the local show to me in Salt Lake is almost like half dominated by crested geckos and their relatives. And so it's from one aspect, your side, it's like, well, I'd like to see diversity. But then again, I mean, for the average keeper that's coming to buy an animal at the reptile show, crested gecko is probably one of the better pets that they could select, just because they're so easy to maintain. There's all sorts of infrastructure around them, like the crested gecko diets and different cages and things like that are and so I think in that regard, that's definitely a good thing for the
Sure.
hobby in general. Then they can enjoy the animal for a longer time. They can, other people might be interested in purchase them if they lose interest or want to move it along. If you have some obscure or hard to keep or rare or difficult to feed animal, that's going to be a lot harder to move on to somebody who is really interested in it.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hear that. I think that, it's one of those things where you have to be willing to, and that there's plenty of people out there that if we were to start to move into more specialized animals that we keep in captivity, I think the market would follow. A lot of these, goods and service producers in the hobby, if they have a new market to emerge from, they'll absolutely start trying to fill that market. And if we can find, avenues for specialty reptiles that we can make, prolific food sources for, and do that, I think I don't think that's an insurmountable problem. I think it's definitely a detractor from the, straightforward and easy, already set up kind of way we do things. And, my kind of thought background in this comes right out of ecology and biodiversity in our ecosystems, and how you set up, how you set up something in nature, or to mimic things in nature, and why do you do that? And one of the big drawbacks with monoculture is when you have an issue around it, it tends to, that issue tends to move through your monoculture very, very quickly, and tends to do extremely large amounts of damage. I think one of the good examples of that is like nidovirus. Nidovirus has gone through a lot of people's collections that it's gotten into and done a lot of damage, because most of the snakes that are affected by nido are, all relatively related to each other, and they seem to all be kept within the monoculture that we like to keep. So, monocultures are fine until you have a problem. And so that biodiversity that you put into your private collection may also work as a stopgap towards some of the damage that a disease or a bacteria or a fungus or whatever can, if it gets loose in your collection, that it can do that. And that's something that comes right out of agricultural farming, where we see potato blight, or some of the different viruses, mosaic viruses, things like that affect plants. And there's little doubt that our modern industrial farming techniques are highly prolific and they're highly successful, but we have to use ever further technology like pesticides that do untold damage to our environment in order to maintain that monoculture, right? So, there's repercussions for maintaining a monoculture, and sometimes you have to take it down routes that are difficult. Now, I'm definitely not saying that keeping ball pythons in mass is the same thing as spraying the things you eat with glycophosphates. But certainly, the point I'm making about problems coming out of monocultures, whether you're talking about plants and industrial farming techniques, or whether you're talking about reptiles in a reptile collection, still suffer from the same kind of downside when something goes awry.
Okay, I'm going to run with that a little, just because I'm a virologist and I like talking about viruses. But I think a lot of these kind of things could be the other way as well. Like, as you branch out and bring in new things, there's various nidoviruses out there, and they've been characterized based on what animal they've been isolated from, but we don't know their origin necessarily. We just know kind of the end product of what animal they're infecting. So it's possible that we had like a green tree nidovirus get into carpet pythons, and then that causes severe disease, or a ball python nidovirus get into green tree pythons and cause severe disease. So it's really hard to say, to look back and say, oh, this is how it happened, or track that down. Or but I believe that a lot of species kind of co-evolve with these pathogens, and a lot of times they're usually fairly inert in the species that they co-evolve in, because the virus doesn't want to cause severe disease and kill the host. They want to just make more of themselves that's transmitted to more of the animals, and they can kind of continue their existence that way. Whereas if it gets into like an unrelated host, for example, like West Nile virus, right? We've got West Nile that replicates in these little passerine birds like sparrows, and it replicates to ridiculously high titers in those animals. And it doesn't cause any overt disease. The animals clear the virus eventually, but in the meantime, they're making like 10 to the 9th, 10 to the 10th per mil.
That's a lot of virus.
Of virus, right? Yeah. So a tremendous amount of virus. And then mosquito will feed on those and transmit it to other birds. And other birds aren't quite so resilient, or humans or horses, but other birds like crows, they're going to die, right, if they get infected with West Nile. Humans and horses can get very sick and can potentially die from West Nile, but they're dead-end hosts. They don't replicate the virus to high titers. So they're not, the natural host, most likely. The natural host would be those little sparrows and other passerine birds that can replicate the virus to high titers, but not die from that infection. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a monoculture, and you have, one of those animals has a ball python, say you're breeding ball pythons and one of those has a ball python nidovirus, there's probably not going to be much of an effect if it spreads to other ball pythons and kind of spreads within your monoculture. Now, you might have a strain emerge, but that requires, mutations and some kind of selective advantage that gives them that additional lethality, or disease causing potential, whatever you want to call it. So that's less likely. You're going to have them just kind of persist in the colony. It's when you move that into a different type of host that's somewhat related, say like a green tree python, you might have issues. And so if you're diversifying and you're branching out and you have a very diverse collection, that could be also a potential recipe for disaster.
Well, but at the same time, don't you feel like having a monoculture, just you basically have a virus that loads into an animal, and you literally spread it across your entire monoculture. And if you don't know it's there, and you potentially could infect, babies could be infected by it. Obviously, they don't cross the envelope in Nido, it seems like. But if you didn't know, you could spread this to these babies go out, and then they go into other collections where they're not necessarily monocultural, and they completely decimate those. I mean, I think
that's kind of what we're
yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, as a monoculture, you basically have a gigantic Trojan horse, and
potentially.
That's kind of. Yeah. That's kind of the way you could see it. And I don't know how much Nido has been looked at in, across other species and stuff, how many other types of reptiles are getting infected by Nido, but it certainly seems to be in the green tree python community. It seems to be in the Morelia community, of which are fairly closely related to each other. They at least co-evolved on the same continent.
I mean, we know they're wild. I mean, they come from the wild, of course, and like we see nidoviruses that have caused pretty severe disease in shingleback skinks in the wilds in Australia. So yeah, I mean, there is definitely potential for that emergence of different variants. I mean, like we're seeing the Delta variant in COVID right now.
Yeah.
So there's that potential, and yeah, if you only have that species, you could have your whole collection kind of go down if you have the introduction of that. So, I mean, that speaks to quarantine, but at the same time, I mean, I think it can work the other way too, where if you bring in trying to diversify and not be monoculture, you could bring in agents that that your collection is not used to and doesn't have as kind of a background type thing. And so, yeah, that could be an issue as well. So it's hard to say, if that. I was just trying to say that's not a cut and dry, like having a monoculture is bad or good in that regard. It can be either or. It can go either way. So
yeah,
I think that just suggests we need to have better quarantine procedures when we're keeping animals, especially in large numbers.
And it would be nice to have, a little more viral and bacterial research around, reptiles. And it would be, it would be nice if they could actually throw some money at we have this worldwide trade that we do, and so much is moved around, and, mixed and matched and swapped and comes in contact with each other that never would come in contact with each other. And we do very, very little to ensure that we're not causing major problems by doing that. And I think that's probably one of those things where, and the other thing I was just thinking is something like Nido in situ probably is a little bit different than Nido in a collection, where, it's coming in contact with other animals. It may not necessarily be infecting shingleback skinks back then, but maybe it's evolved or it's mutated, and now it can infect shingleback skinks, where something that sits in a collection maybe doesn't get that chance to mutate, or maybe it mutates and there's no shingleback skinks because there's just not very many of them in American collections.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that with a lot of different microorganisms, and I mean, a good example is probably the Tasmanian devils, where they had that tumor-causing pathogen that was just wiping out Tasmanian devils in the wild, and they kind of had to take them in until they could, realize what was going on and how to prevent it, or how to treat or vaccinate them against that. And so I think they've made a lot of progress on that, but I mean, that could have been the extinction of that species. And I mean, that's the way nature rolls, sometimes you get animals that go extinct, and maybe some we don't know why in some cases, and others are a little more obvious. I agree that, more the more research is needed, and I think some of these like carpet fests and things that are funding research into nidoviruses is a great thing. I mean, it's really great that the community comes together. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I think going back, my point would be that one needs to be very careful when they establish a monoculture because of something potentially like a nidovirus that may not necessarily originate from the species that they keep, but can infect a species and do a lot of damage before we really figure out what's going on there. So, in a monoculture, one must be careful. I mean, and,
Diverse
in
collection, you got to
a,
worry about the same thing. Yeah, the
you
flip side is also
absolutely have
true.
to be very careful. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this stuff comes right out of the jungle or the, whatever, terrain that it's taken from. And we have very little understanding about the microbial and viral, makeup of those communities and what's really out there. So yeah, one has to be very careful, probably both ways. So.
Well, and I think too, that's another a good thing about monoculture is most of it's captive bred within the United States, and so you're not exposing to some strange pathogens because they're bred and in a facility in the U.S. and they're kept semi-sterile on shavings or on paper or whatever, and they're given clean water, and so and a lot of keepers I think are realizing the importance of a good flow to their work. So you work with babies first, and work with adults on different days, things like that to prevent transmission. If you have something, potentially in your collection, if you're working with your babies on one day, and then you're working with the adults on a different day, and you're wearing you're not wearing the same clothes out there, or the same you're washing your clothes between working out in the baby or the adult areas, and you're kind of keeping them segregated to some extent to keep that kind of thing at a minimum. I think that's probably good practice regardless. But I think there's that benefit of having things clean and having monocultures where you're breeding them in-house. They're generally bred under pretty good circumstances or over several generations, and sometimes that weeds out those issues like pathogens. So I think that can be a benefit for monoculture.
So what do you think about monocultures leading to saturated markets or overproduced markets? I think that's probably another area where I would say that monocultures could be potentially problematic. You definitely see a lot of, I mean, there's no shortage of people breeding ball pythons out there. And I mean, you could go into retics, and I think there's some interesting things that happen out of that aren't really beneficial to my side, but I definitely think that you can look at monocultures, and once you get that stuff nailed down, I mean, and then you see this in industrial farming. Once you get that process nailed down, man, whoo, you can really put some numbers out, right? So, and what is the positive to that? I mean, I think when you have over 7.5 billion people in the world, and you're an industrial farming, outfit with ability to export worldwide, feeding that many people, you've got a market, right? But if you're a ball python producer and there's only so many thousands and thousands of reptile people out there, your market's a little bit harder to maybe justify overproduction. So what do you think?
Sure. I can see that, but I do think that there's definitely a need for large numbers of these commonly kept, commonly available species like ball pythons. I checked Morph Market, and not the condoning or suggesting that site's good or bad or whatever, but there were over 15,000 ads for ball pythons, right? So everybody says, oh, the ball python market is crashing or saturated or blah, blah, blah. But I don't see any slowdown.
Well,
I mean, there's like endless combinations
yeah,
of morphs and things to keep it exciting, and people are still very much interested, and there's people making quite a bit of money selling ball pythons. So I think, you could have a point with some things. I mean, when I go to a show, right, I'm excited about my Australian reptiles. I'm excited about, these little Antaresia, the little pythons from Australia. And for the most part, most people couldn't care less. They want to know what morph, if I have ball pythons at the table, they're all over that. And I sell more ball pythons at these shows than anything else. So, I mean, I'm not saying, I don't keep them for money. So I'm not keeping them to sell them. And I actually sent all my ball pythons out on breeding loan. And so just because I wasn't that excited about them as compared with the Antaresia or the, Morelia or whatever, the different Australian reptiles. And so, but, getting some of the babies back from Brody produced a bunch this year from the animals I sent to him on breeding loan. And they're, so I just picked those up last week and set those up. So there's some fun morphs in there, and, it's kind of fun again to have some ball python babies on hand. So, I think from that regard, like, I think the market can handle quite a bit of those beginner species because they're in high demand. Every pet store carries them, everybody. And I really think they're kind of that gateway for most people to get into other groups or other species or other things, or not. Maybe they're just happy having, ball python. Now, I think the big kind of challenge is that everybody thinks, oh, if I'm going to get ball pythons, I have to be a big breeder and I need to get racks and I need to do this or that. I think with the higher availability, I mean, 15,000 ball pythons, I mean, you can find pretty much any look you're interested in, and probably at the price range you can afford for the most part, unless you just have unlucky tastes and you like the most expensive things. But there's lots of cool morphs out there for not much money. So why not get a nice display and give them plenty of room and get a big cage and that kind of thing. And I think that availability and the mass appeal of these species makes it kind of that way. So I think if people kind of avoid that thought that, oh, I need to breed these things, I need to be a breeder. No, you can keep, and there's no shame in that. There's no harm in that.
Oh, I agree. So I definitely agree with that.
But I think,
I mean, I think I would say that maybe the high number of ball pythons you see on the market are indicative of all of the numbers of people who want to breed ball pythons and who are doing that in number. And the reason they're kept in racks is because people make more ball pythons than they can get rid of. So they're ended up holding on to these animals and maybe the animals sell, maybe they don't. I don't know. But I think some of the whole why would there so many ads and why so many people keep in racks is a numbers game, is they're forced to hold on to some of these animals. Whereas maybe the bigger names, the guys who are, or gals who are out there with some notoriety, the go-to people, they move animals a little easier than others. And so, it's just a time thing where it takes them a lot longer. So they got to hold on to more. Some of the, I guess I would just kind of dispute some of the mechanics of why those, why there's so many ads out there and why people say that the market is saturated.
Yeah, I think I kind of went off on a tangent a little bit there because it's covering a little
too much ground.
Two different things. Because one, I think we need to separate the species from the kind of pyramid scheme idea, right? Just because you buy a ball python doesn't mean you have to get a rack system and become a ball python breeder and produce hundreds of babies to be worth your salt or whatever. You can get one or two animals and put them in a 8x4 cage and put some branches in there and watch them climb, 4 feet in the air or whatever you can provide them with, and enjoy, your 2 ball pythons. I don't think there's anything
well, I'm
wrong with
gonna
that,
I'm gonna lead you down. I'm going to lead you down
that
a path here.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
If that's the case, right. And I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. But one of the leveraging benefits of a monoculture is that you seem to unlock a genome of an animal. And once that genome starts to unlock, it unlocks very quickly. And you can kind of see that from wolves into domesticated dogs, and the amount of domesticated dogs that we have by species now. And you can look at that with ball pythons. So, from a single species to all of these different mutations. And because once that genome starts to unlock and starts to throw a lot of mutations out there, it goes crazy. And so, you can look at retics and berms and ball pythons, a lot of these that were very heavily monocultured animals, and they have this large morphological diversity in them now. And so I think, to your point, yes, you're right. People can just keep them and not have to rack them and turn and morphitize them out the yin yang. But people see this, man, if I jump into this and I can keep these in a rack enclosure, look at all the things I can do when I get into this monoculture. So it almost is like it almost leads you down the path. And a lot of these species tend to not be very difficult to breed, so that it doesn't take a high degree of skill. There's a large number of mutations with them, and I think it leads people into this, holy crap, I can keep a ton of these. I can make all these different looks and all this. And I'm not making a judgment about what's right or wrong. I'm just kind of talking about the mechanics of what leads people into why I think they overproduce these as a result of monoculture.
Yeah. I get that. I think that the benefits definitely are still there, regardless of, because breeders are going to come and go. People are going to get into it for the right or wrong reasons, and if it works and they stick around, then, they find their niche and they move forward with it. So I don't have any problem with that. Obviously that's what I do. I breed animals and I produce, quite a few, and sell those, to other people and try to get them interested in the different species that I keep. But I guess just looking at it, I see some of these monoculture groups almost like a pyramid scheme, like trying to sell them based on the fact that, oh, you can breed these and make your money back and make more and make lots of money. And they kind of twist it that way. And I'm just saying that, that doesn't necessarily have to be part of the equation. We can enjoy these animals, and these beginner animals are great for, just enjoying and setting up in a nice enclosure and just looking and appreciating what you have.
Totally agree. So, for the record,
that might be a total tangent there, but that is what it is. So I don't know what else you got for against monoculture.
Well, I think that, going back to the beginning, I think that, the more we set up into a monoculture, the more we tend to focus on things that, maybe, I don't want to say don't need our attention, but there's a lot of stuff out there that's cool. It's possibly threatened or endangered, and maybe just maybe a monoculture, a monoculturalist model tends us to move us away from those animals.
Yeah, I guess I can see that, but by the flip side too, I think a lot of the beginner species kind of get you interested, and you're like, oh, I can keep this. This is not beyond my capabilities, and any keeper is going to increase their skill if they're successful at all. They're going to keep do well and then think, okay, well, if I can keep this, maybe I can keep the next level, and it gets them interested in other things. And then they also, as they're learning about the species they're keeping, they get into all these other, discover other reptiles and other things that people are keeping. And they, looking for, ball pythons on one site might lead them to discover other groups of reptiles. And so, I mean, yeah, everybody's heard of ball pythons and boa constrictors and things like that. But, how many have heard of an Owen-Pelly python or, some of the more rare things? And, not that we can get Owen-Pelly pythons, but, or a Halmahera python or something, that is acquirable and could be obtained by somebody, but might be more of a specialized or more difficult thing to keep and breed.
I don't think your average first-time ball python keeper would be very happy getting a wild caught Tracy eye in and having to deal with that. They would. I mean,
well, is anybody happy about that?
I mean, I'm fine with it, but
there's a few guys with that have some. That can do that, but yeah, for the most part, most people don't want to get involved in a bitey wild caught scrub python. That's probably not most people's.
And I don't know. Maybe those people who like those bitey, flighty snakes, they're my kind of people, man. I don't know. I mean,
yeah. No, there's nothing wrong with that for sure.
And, as long as you don't get nailed by a really big one, it's not that bad.
Well, I guess I'd ask you, I mean, is that what you started with?
Well, no. I mean, well, I mean, and to your point, I agree with you. I started with ball pythons and I got, but I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I didn't know shit about anything. And that's it.
But it helped you gain your confidence. It helped you think, okay, I can keep this alive and happy and, it's doing well and things like that. And so, I think it's a good way to enter into the hobby. And that's why we need these monoculture, type species where in good numbers. On the flip side, I don't necessarily think we need Traciae produced in the same numbers, right? I mean, if you produced 1,000 Traciae, you would not be able to easily find 1,000 homes for those Traciae. Maybe 1,000, but that's probably pushing it, right? But if you produce 15,000 ball pythons, there's a place for those to go. There's people that are going to buy those. And so, not to mention the export potential and things like that. So if you're producing, thousands of animals, you're probably going to have other markets outside of the United States as well. So, a lot of different things to think about. And I do think that, as a breeder, keeping, if you want to be a professional breeder, you're almost reliant on those monoculture species. You almost have to produce some of those to remain economically viable, I would maintain. I mean, if you want to make, money in this area. Now, I do think there is a place for kind of those small scale breeders where you're going to make enough to kind of cover your costs and keep things going, like myself. Like I keep, more rare or less commonly kept species, and I sell them just fine. And but I think if there were 50 other people just like me that kept the exact same species, that would be maybe a little too much competition. And that's one of the reasons I stopped breeding as many carpet pythons, because I was, they were being imported from Europe, and there were people that were kind of specializing in them, and the morphs hit, and then there were all these people trying to produce all these different morphs, and so it got a little convoluted, a lot of different people, and I just wasn't equipped to kind of compete with those different people that that were maybe full time and could have more time to sell things, and I just thought, well, it's not worth the hassle. I'm just going to slow down my breeding of those species and focus on another group that maybe is less represented in the hobby. So I do think there's definitely space for that, and definitely in this hobby is room for any interest. You can specialize in blind snakes, and you might find a few people that are interested in blind snakes and do very well. and sell them off to,
and maybe you'll agree with me here, but my whole thing is probably like, if I'm gonna produce carpet pythons, I'm gonna probably try to do something, that not a lot of people are doing with them. I think your striped jungle project is a prime example of something that, even with all the hubbub around all the different morphs and all that stuff, if you still had that project going on right now, you'd be selling animals hand over fist still. You know what I mean? So I think the idea that if you're going to participate in a monocultured produce species, that you have to find, those projects within that monoculture that really make sense, and set you out, line breeding in monocultures.
Definitely.
Right. And I think that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the morphs kind of take away from that kind of mentality, but you still can definitely in stuff like tigers and stuff that is very very highly variable and highly complex in how those looks are created, line breed something that's commonly bred as a monoculture and do really well and still be diverse in what you do. And I would say that you're fairly diverse in what you do, while maintaining some species that, maybe not at your house anymore, ball pythons, that are still considered a monoculture. So, I think that's kind of where I would say I'm kind of arguing against the monoculture of, is it easy to have a room that's set up the exact same way and all you have is one species in there? Yes, you can absolutely knock that out of the park, as it gets so much harder to create a rooms or a room that can accommodate different species with different needs. And you almost have to get into like microclimating in one area and maybe trying to find the happy mediums that makes everybody happy. And how do you do that across a bunch of, well, you really can't. So you have to specialize and you have to kind of hone in on the things that you do. And I think that's where, in my mind, I see the most benefit to you're keeping across species. And is there a place for monoculture? Yeah, absolutely, dude. Absolutely. And I think, in the front end of the hobby, where people are coming in the front door of the reptile industry wanting to get their first reptile, it totally makes sense. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that whole shot. I think, retics and berms maybe aren't the best monocultures out there, right? But they're produced as monocultures. So, I think there are some examples of monocultures that we've, that because we've figured out, and we have that quote unquote recipe, it's easy for us to run with. I don't think that there's, I think there's bad examples of monoculture, and just because you can monoculture something and produce it in mass does not make it a good thing. But maybe ball pythons
I do think
example,
those,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely species that are more, like we said, beginner species. Retics are not beginner species. I don't know why these are kept in such number, and I think that's why a lot of these regulations are coming through. If we're not going to police ourselves, and people aren't going to feel like, okay, what am I contributing here? If I'm breeding all these retics and sending those out into the world you don't see these giant retics anywhere. So most of them are probably dying at some point along the road, either through neglect or through moving from house to house, that kind of thing, once they get too big to handle. And so, I think people need to ask themselves, am I doing this responsibly? So I think those kind of projects oftentimes will weed themselves out. Now, retics persist, and Burmese pythons probably were not the worst, but probably not the best either, just because they have so many eggs and they get such big sizes. But I think the retics are the next level to that, right? So, but regardless, I think these kind of things kind of weed themselves out, right? You don't have there still are quite a few produced, but you don't have the numbers that you do with some of these others. I could check that, actually. Let's see. We've got 1,300, so about tenfold less reticulated pythons.
That's still a lot of
quite a bit.
That's a lot, dude. That's a lot.
That is. That's almost as many as crested geckos for sale on the morph market. Now that's just taking from one site, so it's hard.
But
to
if
say
you take that as
a
maybe non-statistically binding average.
Well, and it's probably weighted towards ball pythons, because it was set up to sell ball pythons. So it's kind of branched out in other species. But I think the idea is that we definitely see much less reticulated pythons produced because it's harder to produce those to some extent. Now, when they do produce, they have huge clutches, so that that.
So I think it's a nuanced thing, and I'm gonna just go back to it because I really feel like the monoculture leading to morphs, leading to overproduction is something that's linked. And what's happening to those retics? Well, they're probably, getting neglected and dying or whatever, but that's not a positive. I mean, like just because there's not a ton of them out there, even though there's a ton produced, that's a black eye on us as reptile people, right? Like,
I agree.
How do we, and so again, I'm a big proponent in systems informing the way people behave. Higher priced reptiles lead to better outcomes. I think, not working in monocultures exclusively. Now, is there a place for them? Yes, but the idea that we should produce in monocultures as an industry probably is not the way to go, because there's those things like monocultures leading to morphs leading to overproduction leading to neglect, things like that. So if we are careful about how and when we use monoculture, I think it probably results in better outcomes.
Yeah. Well, and I would refer back to like what I said previously about monocultures is usually things that are not sustainable, like, angry scrub pythons, they're not going to become a monoculture.
That's right.
Because they just don't fit that beginner role and things. So, eventually those things kind of sort themselves out either, against our will through legislation or through, responsible practices, like people realizing, okay, I don't need to produce 1,000 reticulated pythons because there's not that many people out there that can responsibly keep those. Maybe I should select a different species.
And I think the factors that govern scrub pythons, I mean, anybody who's had a full grown angry barneck in their face realizes what that's about real quick, and there's nothing that will check your willingness to jump into something like that than that, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so you do see the number of people who are willing to work with that, and I'm not, and that doesn't bother me. I know how to work with those animals. I know how to handle them so that I don't have just a pissed off animal trying to kill me all the time. Now, does that, I mean, obviously that's out there, and you have those angry animals that are just going to be that way no matter what. But I think that, there are certain species that kind of check themselves, you know what I mean? And I think scrub pythons are one of those. You would think that retics would be one of those. And I don't understand why they're not. I meant, and
that's morphs. That's why, because they want to produce. And frankly, I mean, there's some pretty ridiculous morphs that have tempted me to, get some. They're beautiful, and a normal reticulated python is beautiful. And so, and the other side of it is a lot of these monoculture species are typically initially imports that are cheap. And so that allows people to get a group of them together and allows people to think, okay, that's something I want to work with because I worked with a ball python, when I was a kid, a normal ball python. And now there's these cool morphs and I know I can keep them. So I'm going to keep more of those. And that's a fair reason, I think, for people to look into things. But at the same time, it's, we need to be responsible. Just because there's cool mutations in a reticulated python doesn't mean that we're necessarily suited to keep those. So unless you have, a room size cage to keep that thing in, you might consider a different species.
I think there's stuff that you see some types of mutations in scrub pythons, patternless, exanthics, I mean,
Sure.
they're out there. They're just not, they're not a lot of these striking mutations. Like we haven't seen an albino barneck or something like that. And I guess I would wonder is if we did see that, and that could be a viable thing.
Yeah.
Would scrub pythons ever turn into the next retic? I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Again, you have to have a species that's going to reproduce well and be, amenable to captive keeping. I just don't think the scrubs are necessarily in that category. Yeah. Look how much difficulty people have producing any number.
And that's why. And that's why so I think they're.
I think that plays into it. Whereas. Yeah. I mean, for you, but for a monoculture species, they're definitely not perfect. They fall way short. And so that's the thing is these species, the beginner species, need to be easy to keep, easy to breed, easy to maintain, easy to feed. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things all play into it. So if you miss one of those factors, you reduce the likelihood they're going to become a monoculture species. Now, some I think overcome, like reticulated pythons or the giant tortoises, the spur-thighed tortoises, sulcatas. They lend themselves to these kind of monoculture species or readily available species in herpetoculture because they have such ginormous clutches. So if you do get them to reproduce, you've got 50 babies to sell, and so then they become less expensive because, the supply and demand kind of shifts. And so then you've got these very unsuitable pets, right? For beginners, especially, readily available and in the hands of beginners. I mean, how many adult sulcatas do you see around versus how many are sold as babies? I got one from a friend of ours, it had a soft shell. It didn't last long because it was on death's door when I got it. They were just like, oh, he lost interest. And then it got this spongy shell. I'm like, well, you weren't keeping it correctly, but and I think that's all too common. So there definitely needs to be some responsibility on the side of the breeders as well as the retailers to sell things that are probably going to do well, not just sell things to make a buck. And, sure, sulcatas are fantastic species, but not many people are set up for a mini bulldozer. Right. They're not, they're very hard to contain because they're so large and they're so strong. They can pretty much go through just about anything. I had a desert tortoise. I mean, he was good size for a desert tortoise when I was a kid. That was somebody local had got it. It was kind of one of those grandfathered animals that wasn't illegal, and it got loose, and my friend found it and gave it to me, and so I was able to keep that as a kid. And even that, 1.5-foot tortoise tore through my wall, tore through the drywall in the corner of my closet because he was trying to dig a burrow there. And so my parents were not necessarily happy with me. Yeah. And I could only imagine what a sulcata could do. It could go through the whole wall if it chose to. They could probably take out a 2x4 if they really set their mind to it. So we need to be a little selective in the species that we keep for monoculture and not just base it on, well, we can produce 100 of these very easily, and so let's sell them for $50 a piece. Agree. That's sometimes the cheapest animals are sometimes the worst things for people to start out with, like
iguanas are another that
sulcatas or iguanas.
There are countless of examples of animals that have been monocultured in the reptile industry that just were not appropriate choices, and a lot of them are done so because of their clutch size or things that make them
commercially viable, but not necessarily responsible or And so I can see that downside of monoculture when you get into the wrong species. But I do think there's definitely a very good argument for keeping ball pythons or boa constrictors or some of these that are very readily available, easy to keep. Don't eat you out of house and home, don't dig holes through your wall. And so those are the ones that just really lend themselves to a responsible and a suitable and a nice monoculture. And I think that's kind of the way things need to move for this to progress and for us to get people interested in reptiles. Because if they buy one of the like my friends that bought the sulcata, they're not running out to buy another tortoise because it didn't do well and they didn't have a good experience and the thing just kind of suffered and died, So I don't think that's those kind of lend themselves to getting people interested in reptiles and getting more people
and I think
into the hobby.
People who get into these mistakenly monocultured reptiles realize very quickly that they fucked up. And they don't do it again. So it's one of those things that's like it's not self-perpetuating in the fact that reptile keepers keep going back for more and more and more. It's that these animals still stay in the hobby as monocultured, it's one of those. It's to my point of why a monoculture may not always be the best thing, but unarguably, there certainly is a place for monoculture if applied the right way. And I think ball pythons are probably a good example of that. They don't have really, really large clutches. They're easy to keep. They're a starter species. Like they lots of different colors and patterns. And I mean, they're, a very
keep it going. You're helping my argument.
No, I just look through the front door. A monoculture makes sense. Past the front door, man, you're not making it to the back room with me at that argument. You know what I mean? Like
I mean with you, but I think for the most part, the majority of people, it's a great argument, and people stick with a lot of these species throughout their entire
right, and
that's
those are the people who go on to monoculture the shit out of ball pythons, and they're the ones with racks and fucking hundreds of ball pythons, and they're the ones I'm talking about that never grow out of the monoculture and move on to more diverse species that are interesting and ecologically significant. And that's what I'm talking about. Is there's a reason to bring them in, but just because they stay on it doesn't make it a good thing.
I'd bring up Ben Morrill. I mean, he worked with a lot of the cool species that I did. What's he working with now? All ball pythons. He went back to ball pythons because that was one of the first he kept, and that's his first, interest into reptiles or whatever. And he really loved that species, and he keeps them today and breeds pretty much just ball python. I think he has a couple other species that his kids maybe got him into, but I mean, he had all the cool Australian stuff that I had and worked with, other cool species like Angolan pythons, but he went back to ball pythons. I don't know why, that's just his personal preference, or if they're more commercially viable or easier to keep or whatever, but with his schedule, but that's what he chose.
I would let Ben speak would let Ben to speak to his motivations around that. Sure. But he's also created a genetics company that he used ball pythons to figure out how to sex animals based on their skin sheds. So he's doing things with his ball pythons that really have very little to do with keeping the monoculture. I mean, I hear your point.
Breeds for the more,
and I don't.
He's not basing his genetics company off ball.
Well,
pythons
I get that,
because he's not looking at.
But
genes
isn't that where he started? Isn't that where he started though? Is trying to get his.
It might have got his interest in it, but I don't think it's necessarily.
But one of the first.
I think he actually one of his first tests was in colubrids. Okay. So he. So I don't know. I think that's a great example of how the monoculture can work and foster, more of the same. And I mean, he's producing some really cool mutations and things like that. And he's happy with it. I think I was the one that kind of dragged him into the Australian stuff and some of the non-monoculture stuff. And it just wasn't his cup of tea like the ball pythons were. So he's back where his true interest and love lies. And that's fine. I mean, I welcome it, there's a good diversity and you can keep what you want. And if you like the monoculture species, I mean, that's almost like a benefit, I think, because there's so many more different avenues within that group, that you can keep. And so I don't know, lends itself to the other benefits if you're keeping one of those monoculture species, and makes it maybe easier to move the offspring. Different. There's definitely a lot of benefits to keeping those monoculture species.
Well, for the keeper. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Not everybody likes the big bitey snakes.
Oh,
like
is
you
that
do.
where we're taking it? I
So,
see. All right. Okay.
But I don't fault you for it. I think that's and I'm the same way. Like I said, I like these little weird pythons from Australia that don't seem to be that exciting. A lot of people, they're often called dirt snakes, but I find them very fascinating, very cool. One of my favorite species to keep, but not a lot of people share that attitude. So for me, it's an avenue to educate and to show how cool these things are. But when I first learned about them, I was completely fascinated. A small python that lives out in the middle of the desert of Australia. What a cool thing. What a cool radiation and evolution of these pythons that I really enjoy and like, and I like the diversity.
And Ben can have his ball pythons, and that's cool, man. And I guess my point would be that I hope that while ball pythons maybe be the thing that is the first experience for a lot of us, myself, the industry probably would look very different if everybody was Ben Morrill and went on to just keep ball pythons and that's it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. There's not. But, this reptile hobby is so much deeper than ball pythons. And isn't that like the tagline of Justin Julender? There's so much more out there than just keeping, snakes in a cage kind of thing. And I think that goes
and that's why I took this perspective, is because, that is my interest in my tagline. So I wanted to widen my horizons a little bit and think about the other
I'm just
side.
keeping you honest.
Really, looking for these benefits of the monoculture species. And I think they speak for themselves, right?
Possibly.
If they didn't, there wouldn't be all these ball pythons produced. If they didn't, there wouldn't be all these crested geckos produced, or leopard geckos, or whatever you want to choose. And I think too, like when people stop breeding some of these kind of keystone species, like there was just really so many people working with king snakes and some of the colubrids, and then all of a sudden they kind of disappeared, right? You didn't see them at shows and that kind of thing. And then I think people
didn't
were
even
like,
notice.
"Whoa, where are all these?" And then they all of a sudden they became very popular, and now they're commanding very high prices, and people are jumping into them again and scrambling to get collections of colubrids. And I don't think their popularity, their popularity kind of waned a little bit, I think, for most people, because there were so many available. And I think we've lost some of the things that we had that were available because of that attitude of chasing the next big thing.
I agree.
But there is that demand still. And I think if you're a smart, reptile keeper, you keep what you like. And then if they become popular, that's great. If not, then hold off on the breeding and enjoy them. But I mean,
yourself, I think almost what you said there was that if you don't have that next big thing in monoculture, it just falls apart and it just trails off, and then it comes back because
only if you're a breeder.
Okay. I mean,
yeah. If you're trying to be a commercial breeder and you're trying to make a livelihood based on breeding reptiles, you have to consider what's popular and what people are interested in.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of times people consider themselves that level of breeder when they're really not, and they really don't need to be chasing those things. And they could do just as well as a small batch breeder, focusing on things that they really enjoy and they really like, rather than trying to chase what's popular. But I think for the most part, for the large scale commercial breeders, they have to definitely consider that.
But I think if we're being honest, those large scale breeders are what's setting the mark, and what they're producing and what's selling is what other people see when they make decisions around starting their small time reptile hobby business. And what do I need to keep and sell? And quite honestly, if you are coming in and you've made a thing out of it and you want to produce reptiles, but you don't quite know, so you're going to take those cues until you figure out what the fuck you're doing in the reptile hobby, what you like, what's, where your place is. And then that's when you see that realignment. And so, and that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's kind of how it is. But, again, to be consistent with my point, is there's a place for monoculture and it's right through the front door, but it shouldn't persist out all the way out the back door. You know what I mean? I think that
why not? I mean, if you enjoy that and you like it, why chase stuff you don't necessarily enjoy as much? If you're a ball python guy, stick with ball python. That's a fine way to go.
But I just think that you know, if that's the case, then maybe don't be, you know, either go be a commercial breeder of ball pythons and do it in a monoculture and in a way and be one of those people, or just keep a couple of ball python projects because you love it and bend moral it to the end, and you know, that's fine. But you know, just the idea of keeping, again, I'm going to go back to the idea that, you know, monocultures lead to morphs lead to chasing that next thing, and you get caught up, man. And I think that, you know, look, it's all in application. It's all how you do it. There's nothing wrong with a monoculture, but if you create a monolith of monoculture, that's probably not healthy. I mean, you can see monoculture in a lot of different natural aspects, and it's highly productive, but it can also have a lot of problems. And I think this is, you know, you're basically on the side of it's highly productive and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm saying, yeah, but it has a lot of problems. So, I mean, I just think that, you know, when you talk about monoculture, whether you're talking about the reptile industry and ball pythons, or whether you're talking about farming or land use or any other type of environmental thing, there's definitely downsides to it. And to kind of say like, oh, it's all good. It works towards the benefit of, well, maybe not.
Yeah, but wheat and corn aren't going anywhere, right? They're a monoculture for a reason. And so if you try to say, well, we need to get rid of wheat, or we need to, you know, I think that's kind of the same thing as ball pythons. Ball pythons aren't going anywhere. They're going to be a staple. And so there is a reason there's monoculture. It's because it's important to humankind, I guess. You know what I mean?
And there's nothing wrong with,
there's a reason
there's nothing wrong with
not
wheat.
Not to say like
wrong. There's nothing wrong with wheat. Like there's nothing wrong with ball pythons. Okay. It's not about the product. It's about what happens out of that product. Right. So wheat is necessary. Sure. It gets exported all over the world and used in, you know, all over the place. But it's the chemicals that we need to use, and the synthetic fertilizers and the monocultured way that we industrially farm, rather than a mixed use organic approach to revitalize soils, cut down on the types of pests, use companion planting rather than the monoculture, so that you can put plants that actually resist some of the pests that are endemic to wheat or that. So it's having a sophisticated way that works with the environment in order to do something. It has zero, and because we don't do that, we take the technologically superior, quote in air quotes, you know, way of doing things. We suffer all these issues like pesticide contamination and depleted soils from synthetic fertilizers. So that's my point. It's not about the product. It's about the problems that come out of it.
Well, there's no perfect system. So you're going to have to work out kinks, right? You're going to have to say, okay, do we really want scaleless ball pythons, or do we really want, you know, or do we use these pesticides on our wheat? Wheat's not going anywhere. Ball pythons aren't going anywhere. They're good, and they're a staple of the hobby. Just like wheat is a staple of the food industry, right? And so we're going to try to fix the issues in certain ways. I read a great book, speaking of wheat and wheat production. There was a great book on a scientist that went and, you know, crossbred all these different types of wheat and to make a stronger, more disease resistant type. And I think similar things need to be applied to the reptile industry. That's why I'm saying, okay, just because you like ball pythons doesn't mean you have to be a ball python breeder. You can keep and enjoy ball pythons as pets, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we have a stigma in this hobby that if you don't breed the animals you keep, there's something wrong with you, or you're not, you know, capitalizing on your investment or whatever they say or whatever. So I think there's issues like that need to be worked out of.
Well, I kind of disagree with you.
And just have people understand those things, but I don't think the monoculture is what's bad. I think maybe some of the aspects of the monoculture can be somewhat damaging, like breeding retics. I mean, I think we don't need to mass produce retics, but mass production of ball pythons, I think, is very, very fine and favorable for our industry. So that's kind of what I'd sum up with. But these things are important and useful, but we need to make sure we do it in a responsible manner.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt, application is everything. Clearly, we can use monoculture to leverage to the T's anything that we want. That's been the power of the technology that we've employed, whether that's keeping reptiles or whether that's industrial agricultural farming. I think everything that we talk about and the problems that we have are about use and application, right? There's nothing wrong with the technology, just like there's nothing wrong with the animal. It is how we employ that technology or that animal in the market and the decisions that get made around it, right? So my concern is, and just to say, like, I don't think that the industry is running around telling people that they need to go and be breeders and recoup their. I think people wanting to reproduce animals, and when they get into stuff like morphs and they start like in their head, just like, oh my gosh, I could do that. And people get into their head about it and they're like, this is so cool. I mean, you have to admit that every time you hatch out a clutch, you're like, yes, this is the greatest thing ever. And that's a common feeling. It's not a Justin Julander or a Chuck Poland thing. That is a reptile keeper thing. And I think when people experience that, it's like the drug that hooks them on, So I don't necessarily think that there's, I think you're right in what you're saying, that not everybody needs to go out there and reproduce their animals, and not everyone has to be a breeder. But it's hard as a breeder to turn around and be like, you shouldn't be breeding those. We need responsibility.
I didn't say you shouldn't be. I said,
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. You know what I mean?
That doesn't necessarily have to be part of the equation. It's like hoop dreams. I mean, there's a lot of people that can play basketball very well, but how many are going to make it to the NBA? And if everybody's planning on being an NBA player, there's going to be a lot of disappointed people. And I think, you can breed a clutch or two and enjoy that and hatch out animals. That's, one of the best parts of being in this. And I think a lot of people get over their heads and then they realize, oh, I got into this too fast. And then they get out and they disappear. And I think, again,
totally agree.
Kind of buying into that idea that I need to be a professional breeder or else I shouldn't be doing this is kind of one of the false, one of the misconceptions a lot of people have in this industry. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, cool, man. Good discussion. I liked it.
Yeah. Let us know if there's anything we missed or any other aspects that you guys can think of, and, put some thought into it and see what you think about this whole topic yourself. So that's part of the fun of this, is getting people involved and discussing these as well. But we've gone a little long tonight. So
yeah, that's all
hopefully, you enjoyed it and you got something out of it, and that's the goal here. So see both sides of the coin. Anything else?
I have nothing else. Are we talking about a next show, or are we going to keep people in suspense?
Yeah, let's keep them in suspense. We're lining up some.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Good discussion.
Yep, thank you. We'll see you, everybody.
All right.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.
Fight Club.